Under the vast Arizona sky, where the desert stretched endlessly in all directions, and the horizon shimmered like molten gold, a lone Apache walked in silence. The wind whispered through the dry sagebrush, carrying the scent of dust and memory. His steps were steady, bare feet leaving faint prints on the cracked earth. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows that turned the land into a haunting tapestry of amber and rust. A lean, loyal dog trotted a few steps ahead, its ears twitching, occasionally glancing back as if guiding him toward something unseen. The Apache had no destination in mind when he started walking that morning. For weeks he had wandered through the wastelands that once belonged to his ancestors, searching for a sign or reason to keep moving after everything had been taken. His people were fading, their villages burned, their herds scattered, their songs silenced by the rifles of soldiers and settlers. Hunger had hollowed the faces of the few who remained, and hope was now rarer than rain. Yet something in him refused to surrender. Perhaps it was the stubborn blood of his forefathers, or perhaps the echo of an old prophecy his grandfather once told him that one day, when despair reached its deepest shadow, the earth itself would reveal a way to save their kind. The dog had appeared at dawn, thin and dust-colored, emerging from behind a ridge as though it had been waiting for him. It didn't bark or beg. It simply looked at him with golden eyes, then turned and began walking. Without a word, he followed. In the desert, nothing happened by chance. The day grew hotter as they crossed the barren land, the sky burning white above. The man's skin glistened under the relentless sun, his muscles tensed from years of survival. Beads of sweat slid down his back, mixing with the fine sand that clung to his body. Around his neck hung small pieces of bone and turquoise symbols of his tribe, fragments of a past he still carried like sacred weight. The dog led him north, weaving through the scrub, pausing sometimes to sniff the air or look toward the distance. The Apache trusted it without question. He had learned long ago that animals felt things humans could not. By midday, the land began to change. The flat desert broke into gentle rises, and a few dead trees appeared like ghosts from another time. On the horizon, half hidden by heat waves, something dark stood against the light. As they drew closer, it took shape a small cabin, leaning slightly, its roof sagging, walls weather-beaten and gray. It seemed abandoned for years, perhaps since the early settlers had built it and fled the harshness of this land. The dog stopped and looked back at him, tail low, eyes steady. The Apache paused, scanning the cabin with suspicion. In these wild places, even silence could hide danger. He circled around slowly, noticing the marks of old wagon wheels and a collapsed corral half buried in sand. The cabin door hung crooked on one hinge, moving faintly with the wind. He could hear the faint creak of wood and the soft rattle of something loose inside. The dog stood by the door, waiting. He approached carefully, his hand resting on the handle of his knife. When he pushed the door open, the hinges groaned like a dying spirit. Dust swirled in the golden light that spilled through the gaps in the wall. The air was thick with the smell of old wood, dried earth, something else, something faint but strange, like the scent of herbs, long forgotten. Inside, the cabin was empty except for a broken table, a few scattered bones of animals, and an old chest pushed against the far wall. The Apache stood still, his sharp eyes scanning every corner. Then, as if sensing something unseen, the dog padded forward and began scratching at the floor near the chest. The man knelt beside it, brushing away layers of dust until he uncovered a wooden panel slightly looser than the rest. He pried it open and found a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Inside was a bundle, wrapped in faded cloth. His heart pounded as he lifted it carefully. The cloth crumbled at the edges, but what it revealed made him draw a sharp breath. Inside were objects that did not belong to settlers, beautifully crafted items marked with symbols of his people, of a kind he had never seen before. There were small carved stones, a metal box etched with spirals, and a hide scroll painted with red and black lines. The drawings told a story, one of fire, drought, and salvation. He unrolled the hide, tracing the patterns with his fingers. It showed a mountain range he recognized, a river that no longer flowed, and a mark that looked like the sun with arrows pointing inward. At the bottom, there were words written in an ancient Apache script, one only the elders would remember. He couldn't read them all, but one phrase stood out: "When the world thirsts, the earth's blood shall rise again." He felt a tremor in his chest. Could this be the prophecy his grandfather had spoken of? Could this hidden message hold the key to saving what remained of his tribe? The thought sent a surge of heat through his veins. As he studied the scroll, a faint sound echoed outside, the crunch of footsteps in the sand. He froze. The dog's ears perked up, a low growl rumbling from its throat. The Apache rose silently and stepped toward the window. In the distance, figures moved, 3 riders, their silhouettes sharp against the setting sun. They were not Apache. He could tell by the glint of metal and the way they rode, reckless and confident. He quickly gathered the artifacts, wrapping them back in the cloth. The dog stood at his side, ready. The riders were coming straight toward the cabin. Maybe they had been tracking him, or maybe they too had been searching for what was hidden here. Either way, he knew he couldn't let them find it. This was something sacred, something meant for his people alone. The sun was sinking fast, turning the desert gold and crimson. Shadows stretched long across the ground as the riders drew nearer, their horses kicking up clouds of dust. The Apache's pulse quickened. He had no rifle, only his knife and the strength of his body. But he was not afraid. He had faced worse than death before. He hid the bundle beneath the floor again, covered it with the broken boards, stood quietly in the fading light. When the first rider's voice called out, rough and mocking, the Apache didn't answer. The dog growled softly, teeth bared. The riders dismounted, boots crunching on dry soil. One of them kicked the cabin door open wider. "Someone's been here," the man said. "Fresh tracks."
Ow!
The Apache pressed his back against the wall, muscles tense. His mind raced. He could slip out through the back, vanish into the desert, but if they found the chest, the secret would be lost forever. He clenched his jaw. The wind had picked up, rattling the loose boards, carrying the smell of storm on its breath. Thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, though no clouds were yet in sight. It was as if the earth itself had begun to stir, echoing the tension that filled the air. The Apache took a deep breath, the dog beside him silent now. Eyes fixed on the doorway, the sound of boots drew closer, one step at a time. The door creaked again. The man's hand tightened around his knife. His heartbeat thudded in his ears like a drum. And then, just as the first shadow crossed the threshold, something outside let out a sharp, unearthly cry, a sound that froze everyone in place. The riders turned, startled. The Apache's eyes widened, for he knew that sound. It came from something not of this world, something tied to the very prophecy written on that hide. The wind howled through the desert, carrying dust and whispers. The dog barked once, fiercely. The Apache knew this was only the beginning. What lay hidden in that cabin was not just a relic, it was a key to the survival of his people. But to claim it, he would have to face whatever ancient force guarded it. And whatever darkness had followed those riders through the desert, the sun vanished behind the horizon, and the first lightning split the sky. The thunder rolled across the barren land, distant yet powerful, as if the sky itself had awakened something buried beneath the desert floor. The Apache stood motionless by the cracked wall, knife gripped tight, eyes fixed on the doorway. The dog beside him was silent now, its fur bristling. Outside, the riders whispered among themselves, uneasy after that eerie cry that had echoed through the canyon air. It hadn't been a coyote or hawk. It was something older, something that didn't belong to the world of men. The wind howled again, slamming the loose door against the frame. In that split second of distraction, the Apache moved quiet as shadow. Slipping out through a back opening half hidden by collapsed timber, he knew this land. It was in his bones. He moved low, keeping to the side of the cabin, circling toward the dry ravine that ran behind it. The dog followed without a sound. From behind the dead mesquite, he watched as the riders entered the cabin. He could see their outlines flicker through the broken planks, one holding a lantern, their voices carried in the wind. "Ain't no one here now," one said, but he was. Tracks are fresh. Check the floor, another barked. See if he found anything. The Apache's jaw tightened. They were looking for the same thing. How did they know? Who sent them? As the lantern light danced across the old walls, he heard the clatter of wood being pried open. The riders had found the loose boards. His heartbeat quickened. He couldn't let them take it. That scroll, those relics, they were not just relics of the past. They were a promise for his people's survival. He stepped out from the shadows, his figure blending with the storm's growing darkness. The dog moved beside him, silent and alert. When the first lightning flash lit the horizon, he saw the horses tethered nearby. Without hesitation, he untied one and slapped it hard. The startled horse neighed and bolted, drawing the riders' attention. As they rushed out, shouting, the Apache vanished into the ravine. His knife still in hand, when the thunderstorm finally broke, rain poured across the desert, violent and alive. The dry earth drank greedily, releasing a smell that was both sweet and ancient. The Apache ran through the rain, clutching the wet sand and whispering a prayer in his native tongue. His ancestors had always said rain was the voice of the Great Spirit. Tonight it felt like a warning. By dawn, he had put miles between himself and the cabin. He stopped near a cluster of red rocks, where the land rose into ridges shaped by wind and time. The dog limped slightly, its paws raw from the long run, but its spirit remained unbroken. The Apache built a small fire beneath a ledge and unwrapped a strip of dried meat. He shared it with the animal, watching the sunrise wash the desert in shades of gold and blood. He thought of his village, hidden deep beyond the northern hills. Only a few families remained. Now, theirs, women and children. The soldiers had taken the hunting grounds, the settlers fenced the rivers, and the spirits of the land had grown quiet. They had sent him out to search for a sign, though no one truly believed there would be one. And yet he had found it tore. Perhaps it had found him. The carved symbols on the scroll still lingered in his mind. The earth's blood shall rise again. What did it mean? Was it the river that had dried generations ago? Or something beneath the ground, something alive? His grandfather had once spoken of sacred springs hidden under the desert, guarded by the old gods. The water from those springs was said to heal, to give life where there was only death. If that was what the message meant, then the hope of his people still burned. But if the white men found it first, it would be lost forever. He closed his eyes, recalling his grandfather's voice. The land listens, child. It remembers who walks upon it and why. When the last flame flickers, the land will decide who may stay. The Apache opened his eyes and looked toward the north. The wind carried dust and the faint scent of smoke. Somewhere, those riders were still hunting him. He rose, tightening the strap of his pouch and slinging it across his shoulder. The dog barked once, softly, as if to remind him of the danger ahead. Together, they set out again, following the path of the rising sun. By midday, he reached a narrow canyon where the rocks glowed deep red. Strange carvings marked the walls, spirals, animal shapes, and symbols older than memory. He ran his fingers across them, feeling a pulse beneath the stone, faint but real. It was as if the mountain itself breathed. He built a small cairn of stones and placed a feather at its top, a sign of respect to the old spirits. Then he knelt and pressed his ear to the ground. Deep below, he heard a low, rhythmic, hum-like distant thunder trapped under the earth. He couldn't explain it, but it made the hairs on his arms rise. Maybe the prophecy was already stirring. As he sat in the silence, he noticed movement on the ridge above. 3 dark shapes against the sky. The riders had found his trail again. His pulse quickened. He grabbed his knife and the small bundle of relics, tucking them close. The canyon was narrow, escape upward. Only forward into the shadows ahead. The dog barked once, then darted into the darkness of the canyon passage. The Apache followed, guided by the faint echo of dripping water. The deeper he went, the cooler the air became, heavy with the smell of damp stone. He reached a cavern where a small trickle of water seeped from the wall, glowing faintly in the filtered light. He knelt beside it, touching the cool liquid. It was clear, pure, unlike any water left in the desert. He drank, and a warmth spread through his body. His fatigue faded. The dog drank too, and its limp vanished. He realized what it was, the sacred spring of the old stories. Hidden beneath the desert all along, the earth's blood, the hope of his tribe. But even as he felt that revelation burn through him, a shadow moved at the cave's entrance. One of the riders. Then another. They had found him again. The first man stepped forward, holding a rifle. "Hand over what you took," he snarled. "You don't know what you're messing with." The Apache said nothing. The cave walls seemed to hum louder, as if the ground itself had begun to listen. The rider took another step, his boots echoing. "You can't stop us, savage. Whatever you found, it's ours now." The Apache's gaze shifted to the water beside him, then back to the intruder. "This land belongs to no man," he said quietly, "and it will not serve those who disrespect it." The man raised his rifle butt before he could fire. A sudden roar filled the cavern. The ground trembled. The water surged, rising from the rock as if alive. The Apache shielded his eyes as a blinding light burst from the spring, flooding the cavern in gold. The riders screamed, their voices swallowed by the echoing thunder. When the light faded, only silence remained. The Apache opened his eyes slowly. The water still flowed, stronger now, glowing with an otherworldly hue. The riders were going to vanish into the depths of the earth. The dog stood beside him, trembling but unharmed. He didn't understand what had just happened. But he knew one thing: the power hidden here was real, and it was not meant for greed or conquest. It was the spirit of the land itself, awakened at last. Outside, the storm had passed, and the sun broke through the clouds, casting light across the desert floor. The Apache stepped out of the canyon and looked toward the horizon. Somewhere beyond those hills, his people waited, tired and hungry, but still alive. He would return to them with hope, with proof that the old spirits had not forsaken them. But as he began his journey back, a faint shadow moved far behind him, survivor of the riders, watching from the rocks. His eyes burned with greed and fear. His hand clutched a broken piece of the relic the Apache had uncovered earlier. The desert wind rose again, carrying the whisper of thunder from afar. The Apache didn't look back. He only walked forward, unaware that the battle for the sacred land and the secret of its power had only just begun. The sun was falling behind the red hills when the Apache reached the edge of the valley. The air was heavy with dust, glowing like fire in the dying light. His body ached from days of walking, but his mind stayed sharp. The sacred spring he had found still burned in his thoughts, the strange light, the trembling earth, and how the riders had vanished before his eyes. It felt like a dream, but the memory of it was too real. The land had spoken that day, and he had seen its power. Yet he also knew others would come searching for it. The spring was not just water. It was life, strength, and salvation. Whoever controlled it would hold power over all the land. The dog trotted ahead, sniffing the wind. Its fur glistened faintly, still touched by the glow of the cave water. The Apache could feel a similar energy in his own veins. The fatigue that had haunted him for weeks was gone. His senses were sharper, his body stronger. He had no doubt now the spring held something more than simple water. It was sacred energy, something ancient that the earth had guarded for centuries. But power always drew danger. As he descended into the valley, he saw smoke rising from the north. His heart sank. That was the direction of his village. He quickened his pace, the dog following close behind. The smell of burnt wood grew stronger. When he reached the outskirts, the silence struck him harder than any wound. The village was gone. Only the frames of huts and the blackened remains of fires remained. Ash drifted through the air like ghosts. He knelt beside what used to be the central fire pit and pressed his hand into the cold earth. There were footprints, soldiers, heavy boots, horses. They had come through recently. He found signs of struggle, broken arrows, and blood on the ground. But there were no bodies. That meant his people had been taken, not killed. The soldiers had likely taken them toward the fort near the river, where the army kept control over the lands they had seized. He looked toward the horizon, rage tightening in his chest. The prophecy had warned of such times when men would tear at the earth and enslave its children. Now it had happened again. His people were prisoners, their freedom stolen. But something else stirred within him an understanding. The spring's power could help him save them, if he could understand it. He spent the night near the ruins, feeding the fire only enough to stay warm. His dog slept close, ears twitching at every sound. The Apache stared at the stars, their cold light reflecting in his eyes. Each one felt like a memory, a reminder that the spirits still watched. He whispered softly in his native tongue, asking the ancestors for strength and guidance. Then he pulled the relics from his pouch, the carved stones, the metal box, and the painted hide. The firelight made the symbols shimmer. He studied the drawings again, tracing the mountain shapes with his finger. There were more clues, their markings that seemed to point toward another place. Deeper into the land, near the river where the soldiers had built their fort. Perhaps the ancients had known this would happen. Perhaps they had left behind more than one source of power, hidden across the desert like the veins of a living earth. When dawn came, he set out toward the river. The air was cool, and the sky burned pink over the distant hills. Every mile brought new signs of movement: wagon tracks, boot prints, broken branches. The soldiers were not far ahead. But someone else was following him too at first. He only felt it, a weight in the air, the faint sound of stones shifting where no wind blew. Then, one afternoon, he saw a flicker of movement among the rocks. A man, tall and lean, his hat low over his face. It was one of the riders who had escaped the cave. The Apache's jaw tightened. The man was tracking him, waiting for the right moment to strike. The Apache changed his path, slipping into narrow canyons and using the terrain to his advantage. He had lived his life in these lands. He knew how to vanish when needed. But his pursuer was clever. Each time he thought he had lost him, he caught another glimpse of that dark figure in the distance, following like a shadow. That night, as he made camp near a cluster of dry trees, the Apache sat silently beside the fire, sharpening his knife. The dog suddenly growled, staring into the dark. The Apache stood, knife ready, eyes searching the brush. Then a voice came low, cautious, with a strange accent. "I don't mean harm, warrior. I came for the truth." The rider stepped into the light, his face rough and sunburned. His clothes were torn, and a faint burn mark scarred his arm, the same place the sacred water had touched when the light consumed his companions. He looked half mad, yet not hostile. "That cave," he said, breathing hard. "You saw what it did. It swallowed them all, but it spared me. I don't know why." The Apache said nothing. The man looked at him, eyes wide with fear and awe. "It's real, isn't it? The power. I saw it with my own eyes. It's not gold or silver, it's something else. I can feel it still inside me." He tapped his chest. "It's like fire that doesn't burn." The Apache's voice was calm but firm. "The spring is not for men like you. It belongs to the land. To those who respect it." The rider shook his head. "Respect won't stop the army from taking it. They'll come for it soon. They already know something's out there. I overheard them at the fort. They're sending men to search the canyons." He hesitated, lowering his voice. "They have your people too. I saw them being taken in wagons." The Apache's eyes darkened. "Why tell me this?" "Because I want to live," the man said. "And if that power can destroy like it did back there, maybe it can save us too." The Apache studied him for a long moment, then turned away. "The land chooses who it saves." Still, the words stayed in his mind as the night deepened. If the army truly knew about the spring, then everything was at risk, not just his tribe, but the balance of the land itself. The next morning, he and the dog were gone before the rider awoke. They moved swiftly along the river trail, where the sand grew dark and damp. Birds circled overhead, and the faint hum of insects filled the air. As he approached the river's bend, he saw the first sign of the fort wooden towers, guards and the distant clanging of metal. He stayed hidden among the reeds, watching. Soldiers moved in and out, dragging prisoners to the stockades. Among them, he saw faces. He recognized women from his village, children, elders. Rage surged in his chest, but he forced himself to stay still. One wrong move, and he would die before reaching them. As he watched, a group of men rode in from the west. They wore civilian clothes, but their movements were practiced. Among them was a tall man with a long coat and a silver badge glinting at his chest. He was no soldier, but a government agent. He dismounted and handed a sealed letter to the officer in charge. The officer read it, nodded, and led the man inside. The Apache knew what that meant. The government had heard rumors of the light in the desert, of strange water that healed and glowed. They wanted it. They would dig the land apart to find it. That night, under the cover of darkness, he crept closer to the fort. The dog stayed behind the fence line, silent as shadow. He watched the guards, learning their shifts, their habits. Near the prisoner pens, he saw a small child sitting by the fence, a boy from his village. The child looked weak, but his eyes still burned with spirit. When the boy saw the Apache's figure moving in the shadows, his face lit with recognition, and he pressed a finger to his lips. The Apache nodded once, signaling for patience. He would come back for them. But before he could move, the sound of footsteps behind him made him freeze. He turned slowly. The rider stood there, holding a rifle, his expression torn between fear and greed. "I followed you," the man whispered. "You can't fight them alone. Let me help. We both want the same thing." The Apache didn't lower his blade. "You want the spring?" he said. "I want to live," the man replied. "And maybe you can't save your people without me. You'll need someone who knows how these soldiers think." The Apache hesitated. He didn't trust him, but he knew he might be right. The man had seen things inside the fort he hadn't. He could be useful for now. "Then you'll do as I say," the Apache said. "If you betray me, the land will judge you before I do." The rider nodded quickly. Together they slipped into the darkness, the faint glow of lanterns flickering across the fort walls. Somewhere beyond those fences, his people waited. Beyond the river, the sacred power still slept beneath the earth. In between them stood greed, iron, and betrayal waiting to strike from the shadows. The storm clouds gathered again over the horizon, thunder rolling faintly through the desert night. The land was restless once more, as if preparing for the battle that was about to begin. The night was thick with silence, broken only by the faint rattle of the river wind against the fort walls. The Apache crouched low behind a pile of barrels, his eyes fixed on the flickering lanterns near the gate. The soldiers' voices carried faintly through the air, lazy and careless, unaware of what the darkness concealed. The rider was beside him, clutching his rifle nervously, sweat glistening on his forehead. The dog waited behind them, its body tense, its yellow eyes fixed ahead. The Apache raised his hand to signal for stillness. In that moment, time seemed to hold its breath. He had watched for hours, studying the guards, counting their steps, memorizing every movement. The prisoners were kept near the far corner of the fort, locked behind a wooden fence. He could see faint silhouettes huddled under blankets as people, the last of his tribe. Among them was the boy he had seen before, awake and staring at the stars, unaware that help was already moving through the shadows for him. A cloud covered the moon, and darkness fell heavy over the land. That was his moment. The Apache moved like smoke, swift and soundless, gliding along the walls. The rider followed, stepping carefully, his breath unsteady. When they reached the back fence, the Apache drew a small blade from his belt and began cutting through the rope knots that held the boards together. The sound was faint, almost lost in the rustle of the wind. Then the rider whispered, his voice trembling, "They'll hear us if we don't hurry." The Apache didn't look up. "Silence is faster than fear," he said. His hands kept moving until the final strand snapped loose. He slipped through the gap and pressed himself against the wooden pen where the captives lay. The dog followed, crawling through the sand. Inside the pen, a woman stirred. When she saw the Apache's face, her hand flew to her mouth in disbelief. Tears welled in her eyes as she reached for him, but he motioned for quiet. "We go when I signal," he whispered. "Stay low." The rider kept watch near the edge of the pen, his rifle raised. Every shadow felt alive. Every gust of wind sounded like boots in the distance. When the Apache finished loosening the last board, he turned to the captives. "When I move, "Follow the river," he said softly. "Don't stop, no matter what you hear." But before they could act, a voice shouted from the walls, "Who's down there?" The Apache froze. A lantern swung toward them, its light slicing through the dark. Then came the sound of boots pounding the dirt and rifles being cocked. The dog barked once a warning, and the Apache sprang into motion. He pulled the nearest guard down before the man could raise his gun, silencing him with a swift strike. The rider fired once, and chaos erupted. Alarms rang out through the fort as soldiers rushed to their posts. The prisoners scrambled to their feet, confusion and fear mixing in the night. The Apache shouted in his language, "To the river!" and they began to run. The rider reloaded quickly, covering their escape, shots echoing through the compound. Bullets tore through the air, splintering wood and kicking up sand. The Apache grabbed the child, pulling him close as they dashed toward the fence. The dog ran ahead, barking fiercely, leading the way through the darkness. Behind them, soldiers shouted orders, their torches blazing like small fires. They reached the riverbank, but the water was higher than before, rushing fast with the recent rain. The Apache looked back. Dozens of soldiers poured from the fort, their lanterns glowing like eyes in the dark. There was no time to hesitate. He lifted the boy and leaped into the water, the cold shock biting his skin. The others followed, one by one, carried by the current. The rider was last to enter, hesitating for a heartbeat before plunging in. The gunfire from the bank followed them, but the current swept them out of range. The Apache fought to keep his head above water, guiding the boy and the woman beside him. The dog swam ahead, barking into the storm wind. When they reached the far side, they collapsed on the sand, gasping for air. The Apache helped the others out, scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. For now the soldiers were on the opposite bank, their torches flickering like distant fireflies. But they wouldn't stop. They would come again, stronger and angrier. The Apache gathered his people and led them into the hills. They climbed through rocky ground until the fort was no longer visible. When they finally stopped, the woman turned to him. "You came back," she said in a trembling voice. "We thought you were gone." "I could not stay away," he said quietly. "The land showed me the way." They made camp near an old ravine, hidden by high rocks and dry brush. The air was cold, but the fire they built gave off a soft warmth. The people huddled close, whispering prayers of thanks. The Apache stood apart, watching the river below, thinking of the spring hidden deep in the desert. That power could end all this suffering, if only he could understand how to use it without bringing more destruction. The rider approached him from behind, limping slightly. "They'll follow us by morning," he said. "We need to move again soon." The Apache nodded. "No, but there is something I must do first." The man frowned. "That spring of yours? You think it can stop them?" "It is not mine," the Apache said, "but it may be the only thing that can save us." The rider sighed. "Then I'm coming with you." "You will slow me down," the Apache said. "Maybe," the man replied. "But you'll need someone to watch your back. Those soldiers aren't the only ones hunting for it now." The army sent word to the towns. "Bounty men are coming too." The Apache looked at him, seeing truth in his eyes. He didn't trust the man, but he respected his courage. "At dawn we go," he said. When morning came, the sky was gray with mist. The Apache left the camp under the care of the elders, promising to return before the next moon. He took the relics from his pouch, the dog at his side, and set out with the rider toward the canyon where the sacred spring lay hidden. The air grew heavier as they neared the mountains. The ground cracked and hot beneath their feet. The rider spoke little, glancing often at the sky as if expecting something to strike from above. By afternoon they reached the mouth of the canyon. The same carvings still marked the stone walls, glowing faintly in the dim light, but something was different. The ground trembled softly, and a strange warmth filled the air. The Apache touched the rock and felt it pulsing beneath his hand, like a heartbeat. The earth was waking again. They entered the cave, and the air grew cooler. The faint hum of the spring echoed through the chamber, the sound both beautiful and haunting. The Apache knelt beside the water, its glow stronger than before. The dog sniffed the air, uneasy. Then, from the shadows at the cave's edge, came the sound of footsteps. The Apache spun, knife drawn. As a group of armed men stepped into the light soldiers and bounty hunters, led by the silver-badged agent he had seen at the fort, the rider cursed under his breath. "They must have tracked us." The agent smiled coldly. "You led us right to it," he said. "We've been looking for this for a long time." The Apache stood his ground. "This place is not yours to take," the agent laughed. "Everything here belongs to the government now. We'll drain it, study it, sell it, whatever it takes. You can keep your old stories." The Apache's grip tightened on his knife. The hum of the spring grew louder, vibrating through the air. The walls seemed to shimmer, as if alive. The dog growled, hackles raised. The rider looked between them, fear creeping into his eyes. "Don't do it," he whispered. "If that thing reacts again, we might all die." But the Apache felt something different this time, a calm power rising from the ground, flowing into him. The cave began to glow brighter, and the water rippled, as if stirred by an unseen hand. The agent shouted for his men to fire, and chaos erupted. Gunshots echoed through the chamber, bullets sparking off stone. The Apache dove behind a rock, the dog darting beside him. The rider fired back, trying to hold them off, but they were outnumbered. Dust filled the air, and the hum of the spring turned into a deep, resonant roar. Cracks split the cave floor, and the water surged upward like a living force. The Apache knew the land was awakening, responding to their violence. He shouted over the noise, "Stop! The earth is warning us." But no one listened. The agent aimed his pistol, his voice hard. "You can't stop progress." The ground shook violently. Stones fell from the ceiling. The Apache reached for the relics, pressing them against the rock symbols. The carvings flared with light brighter than fire. The sound of the spring deepened until it drowned out everything else. The last thing he saw was the river of light surging from the ground, washing over the cave, swallowing both enemies and friends alike. The dog barked once, a sound that echoed like thunder across the canyon. Then, in a single flash, the desert night was alive with power, and the fate of his people hung in the balance as the land itself decided who would rise and who would fall. You said, continue from where the climax left off and right? 1,200 words wrapping up the story. This part should provide a satisfying resolution, answer any remaining questions, and conclude subplots. Leave the audience with key takeaways or reflections, making the ending memorable and engaging and a good happy ending. Naturally, include keywords to keep the SEO optimization strong. End the story now in natural way. Also, do not make any headings. Only write story in paragraphs. Also, keep the wording simple and natural tone. Also, make the script human-centric, and don't give feel of AI-generated. Also, don't create violated content which can affect YouTube policy. AI sees the ellipsis as 3 dots. So, it reads it as ... That's why do not use 3 or 2 dots collectively, ChatGPT said. When the light finally faded, silence returned to the desert. The wind that had been howling through the canyon stopped, and the air grew still, filled with the scent of wet earth. The Apache opened his eyes slowly, breathing hard, his hands still pressed against the ancient carvings. The cave was no longer trembling. The sacred spring now flowed calmly again, glowing faintly in the soft light. Around him, the floor was cracked and covered with a thin mist that drifted like smoke. The soldiers who had stormed in were gone, their weapons scattered, their presence erased, as if the earth itself had swallowed them. Only the rider and the dog remained near him, both alive, both shaken. The Apache rose unsteadily, his body weak but his spirit burning bright. The relics in his hands had gone cold, their light fading, their purpose fulfilled. He looked toward the spring, and for the first time, he understood its true meaning. It was not a weapon or a treasure. It was life pure and ancient, something that would protect those who respected it and destroy those who sought to exploit it. The land had chosen its side. The rider sat slumped against a rock, staring at the glowing water with wide eyes. "It's over," he whispered, his voice trembling. "They're gone." The Apache nodded. "The land took back what was stolen?" The man's face softened with disbelief. "I didn't believe you before," he said. but I saw it with my own eyes. It's real. The power of the earth. It listens." The Apache walked to the edge of the spring and dipped his hand into the glowing water. It felt warm, alive, almost like the pulse of the earth itself. He poured some into his cupped hands and drank. The exhaustion that had settled into his bones began to fade, replaced by a calm strength. He motioned for the rider to do the same. The man hesitated, then knelt beside him and took a small sip. His face relaxed, the fear leaving his eyes. "The spring won't harm those who come in peace," the Apache said quietly. "It heals what is broken." The dog barked softly, tail wagging for the first time in days. The Apache smiled faintly and placed a hand on its head. "Even the beasts of the land know when peace has returned." They rested there until dawn, letting the golden light spill into the cavern. When morning came, the air was clear and the hum of the spring was gentle again. The Apache gathered the relics, wrapping them in a new cloth. He turned to the rider. "This place must stay hidden," he said. "No one can know what lies here. Promise me." The man nodded solemnly. "I'll keep the secret," he said. "After what I saw, I'd never cross this land again without respect." The Apache studied him for a moment, then offered his hand. The rider hesitated, then clasped it firmly. "You were once my enemy," the Apache said, "but the land spared you for a reason. Maybe so you could remember." The man looked down, shame flickering in his eyes. "Maybe it was so I could start over," he murmured. They left the canyon together, walking under the pale light of morning. The desert looked different now, alive, shimmering with a quiet beauty. Flowers had begun to bloom among the rocks where none had grown before. The river below flowed stronger, feeding the land that had been dry for years. It was as if the world itself was healing. When they reached the hills, the Apache stopped and looked back one last time. "The earth will guard its secrets now," he said softly, "but the message remains for those who still listen." The rider nodded and turned toward the distant road, where the sun touched the horizon. "What will you do now?" he asked. "I will go back," the Apache said. "My people wait for me. The spring's gift must be shared with them." They parted ways there, each heading in a different direction, bound by what they had witnessed. The Apache walked for 2 days across the open plains, following the same trails that had once been soaked with sorrow. The desert that had once seemed lifeless now carried the faint sound of running water in the distance. Birds circled above again, and the scent of rain lingered in the wind. The land was alive once more when he finally reached the hidden valley where his people had taken shelter. The sight before him brought tears to his eyes. His tribe had survived. They stood together at the edge of the camp, weary but alive. And when they saw him approaching with the dog at his side, a cry of joy echoed across the valley. Children ran to him, clinging to his legs, and the elders lifted their hands in blessing. The woman he had rescued from the fort stepped forward, her eyes full of gratitude. "You came back to us," she said softly. "I said I would," he replied. The land kept its promise. He led them to a nearby ravine where a small stream now flowed. The water shimmered faintly, touched by the same sacred light as the spring. When they drank, the weariness left their faces. The sick grew stronger. The children laughed as the water splashed in their hands. The prophecy had come true. The earth's blood had risen again to save its people. That night, they lit a great fire in the center of the valley. The tribe gathered around, their voices rising in song for the first time in many seasons. The Apache sat quietly near the flames, the dog resting beside him. He watched the faces of his people, the glow of the fire reflected in their eyes. They were no longer a people of sorrow, but of renewal. The desert had given them back their life. As the stars filled the sky, one of the elders approached him. "The spirits chose you," the old man said. "You carried their strength when all others lost faith. What you did will be remembered for generations." The Apache shook his head gently. "It was not me," he said. "It was the land. I only listened." The elder smiled. "Then may our children learn to listen too." In the distance, thunder rolled once more, not a warning this time, but a blessing. Rain began to fall, soft and cleansing, soaking the earth that had long been thirsty. The people raised their faces to the sky, laughing and crying all at once. The Apache closed his eyes, feeling the rain wash away the dust of battle and the pain of loss. He knew his ancestors were watching, their spirits alive in every drop. When morning came again, the valley was green. The river ran full, winding through the land like a ribbon of light. The tribe began to rebuild, planting new homes, carving their songs into the rocks. The dog roamed freely, guarding the camp as if it understood the sacredness of what had been restored. The Apache walked among his people, teaching the children the old ways, how to honor the land, how to listen to the wind, how to see meaning in the silence. The rider kept his word. Months later, far to the north, he spoke quietly of the event only once, to a preacher passing through town. He said there were places in the desert where the earth breathed and where no greed could survive. Then he vanished from the towns and forts, leaving behind the life he had once lived. Some said he went west. Others said he built a small cabin near the mountains, never to be seen again. For the Apache, life went on peacefully. Seasons passed, and the valley flourished. The sacred spring remained hidden deep within the canyon, its power untouched. The prophecy that once felt like a dream had become the foundation of their rebirth. They were no longer running from the world, but living in harmony with it again. Sometimes, at night, the Apache would stand by the river and look toward the distant hills. He could still feel the pulse of the land beneath his feet, the same hum that had once shaken the cave. It was no longer a sound of warning, it was the song of life. The earth had healed, and so had he. He raised his face to the stars, whispering a prayer of thanks. The dog sat beside him, tail resting in the sand, eyes watching the horizon. The desert stretched endlessly before them, no longer empty, but full of promise. The lone Apache, who once followed a dog to an abandoned cabin, had found far more than survival. He had found purpose, faith, and the proof that even in the harshest lands, the spirit of hope could bloom again. The sun rose golden over the desert, and the wind carried the voices of his people strong, alive, and free.